Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Paper Tray Ink Make It Monday. I'm Lizzie Jones and I'll be your host this week as we take it back to the basics with a simple shadow stamping technique. This is a great way to add depth and interest to your sentiments and it doesn't require any special supplies. So to get started today I'm using a piece of white cardstock for my sentiment panel. It's cut to about 4 1/4 by 2, give or take. We'll be doing some partial die cutting here in a second. So I just made it extra oversized so I could have the space to cut off what I needed. Now this flower I'm using today, everything I'm using is from the Warm Regards stamp set. And I'm adding a little bit of berry sorbet to the ends of this dogwood bloom. I stamped originally in pale peony. So I'm just doing that to give it a little depth and interest. And the center of the flower I'll be adding here, I'm doing in spring moss. So I'll be just adding that little center there. And now I'm going to do the partial die cutting. So I'm just going to place the die where I need it to go and secure it with washi tape. I'm going to be cutting off the top portion of that strip. So I'm going to draw a guideline where I know I want the die cutting to stop, and that just makes it easier to place my plate when I go ahead and do the die cutting. So here I've got my plate over the area of the flower that I want to cut, and I just used that guideline to make sure everything was nice and straight. So I'm going to use a straight edge and a craft knife to cut off that top section of the panel there, and I'm just lining it up against that pencil line that I made earlier, so I don't even have to erase it. I'm just going to cut it all the way off. And this way you've got a little bit of that flower sort of popping over the top edge of what will be the sentiment panel. So it's a nice way to add a little bit of interest to the sentiment panel as well. So here we go. And now the technique of the video, the point of the video here, we're going to stamp our sentiment. So I'm shadow stamping the sentiment. I'm first stamping it in olive twist, just going over it really well to make sure it's nice and inked up evenly. I'm going to place this here on the sentiment strip. There we go. And again I'm going to, well here I'm going to stamp off, and then that's the excess ink. I'm not going to bother cleaning between. And then I'm going to use spring moss for the shadow. So get that all inked up there. And then all I do to shadow stamp is sort of eyeball it. I place the stamp over the original impression, and then I shift to the side and below just a little, and it creates that sort of shadowed look. It just gives the sentiment a little bit more depth, a little bit more weight, and makes it interesting. So now I'm going to finish up the rest of the card. So I'm just going to sponge the edges of this Sweet Blush panel with pale peony. I'm going to do that all the way around the outside edge. And then I'm going to go over that sponging with sponging through the Stencil Basics Quatrefoil stencil. And same ink, I'm just adding a little bit more depth and interest to the edges. Now this panel is actually 4 1/2 by 5 3/4. I'm going to trim off the harsh color on the edges. So here I have all of the pieces of my card ready to go. The branch, I used exactly the same colors that I had on the flower that I stamped that I showed you. The only additional colors were olive twist for the leaves and dark chocolate for the branch itself. And once I got everything kind of together, I realized I wanted to add some leaves in there as well. So I'm going to add the leaf here. There are 4 different leaves in the set. I'm going to add one of them in Olive Twist directly on the card front panel. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and get everything sort of situated and built on the card front. So I'm just trying to make sure that I've got a little bit of overlap with the branch and the flower that I've already stamped, just to ground everything nicely. So now that I know kind of what I want my layout to be, I'm going to add the adhesives to the back. So I'm going to add foam tape to the back of the sentiment strip, and I'm just going to add little pieces. I don't want it to go around go the entire width, because sometimes when you have layers of paper, it can kind of make the die cut or the strip or whatever lay funny, just because of the different thicknesses. So I'm intentionally going around the die cut here, and you know, it's supported well enough that I don't really believe it will be an issue once it's on the card, as far as support is concerned anyway. And I'm going to use flat adhesive for the branch. So I just used my ATG there to add adhesive to the backs of the flowers. Okay, so now that everything's flipped back over, I can kind of situate it on the front of the card again, make sure everything looks nice before I press down the flat adhesive. I didn't remove the backing on the sentiment strip yet, because I knew I wanted to flip over the flower and stem and cut off that branch a little bit. So now I'm removing the backing for the sentiment strip, and I'm going to use the grid line on my stamp mat to make sure it's nice and straight. And then I will press everything down. And I know that I want to add a little bit of dimension to the flower that's above the sentiment strip, so I'm going to use just a little bit of foam tape there to make sure it's nice and supported and it won't flatten out or smush down or anything. I also have that little flower to add, and so I'm going to add that with foam tape as well, assuming I can get the backing off. Anyway, there we go. And I'm actually going to add it with 2 layers just to give it a little extra height against the other flowers. So we're going to add that right about there. Yeah. And I'm just going to add this to the base then. So I've got my ATG here, and just going to put the adhesive on the base instead of the back of the card front, since I've already got the foam bits on there. And I'm just going to line it up and be done with that. There we go. So I decided after I looked at the card for a few minutes that I needed another leaf. So I pulled the smallest of the leaves from the Warm Regards set, and I'm going to add that here with Olive Twist as well. So here we go, and as so often happens when I decide to do something at the last minute, I totally screwed it up. So I had to kind of get my head totally in your way there just to fix the leaf, but it came out fine, so that's all dandy. And so I've got my little flower there reattached, and there you go. Simple technique this week. All you need are inks and some sentiment stamps, and just play around with it. You could generation stamp or use a separate color. It's really up to you. So I hope you'll head over to the Paper Tray Ink blog and link up your project for your chance to win a gift certificate. This has been Lizzie Jones for Paper Tray Ink. Have a great week, everybody.